into it and have a look at what we're covering in this lesson, which is all about composition and movement. So we're going to have a look first of all at some basic compositional techniques that you should follow to improve the quality of your video capture. We'll talk about the different types of movement there is. So particularly, if you're coming to this from a photography background, this is obviously going to be very, very important as well. You may have some of those compositional techniques down already, but certainly adding in movement, it brings in a whole new set of skills that you need to master. And then we'll have a look at shot types. So there's different types of shots that we can use to help tell our stories when it comes to capturing video. Let's kick things off by having a look at our compositional techniques. So first of all, what exactly is composition? Well, composition, I want you to think of it like if you're a composer, like someone who is composing an orchestra. You're controlling how quickly or how slowly the orchestra is playing the music, the tempo that they're playing the music at, if they're playing it loud, if they're playing it softly, and so on. It's a similar idea when it comes to anything visual. Composition refers to how we place elements within the scene to communicate the message that we are trying to achieve within the shot. Now, when it comes to still photography, composition is key because you've got one image that you're trying to communicate with. When it comes to video, we're also including movement with that as well. A lot of these techniques are based in photography composition. In fact, they go further back than that. They're based in art history composition, but then we begin to bring in movement. Let's have a look at good composition first of all. So here we've got a very cinematic still. As you can see, this is something straight out of film. A very straightforward composition, but has an impact, very visually arresting, very aesthetically appealing. So what makes this good? What makes this good composition? Well, first of all, the main subject is clearly communicated to the viewer. So we've got a young woman standing in a field in the meadow. The sun is presumably going down, perhaps it's going up. We've got a nice little bit of light catching her, but she's generally quite silhouetted. The focus, exposure, and composition are all correct. So in other words, nice sharp focus on our main subject here, the young woman. The exposure, we can see that there's lots of details here. Even though it's quite dark on her back, we can still see the details in the kind of light and the shadow areas, and certainly in all the details in the rest of the scene. The viewer's attention is held. It's very, very clear what we're looking at here. Again, it's quite a visually arresting shot. So, our attention is engaged, and the use of color, motion, and depth of field all contribute. Now, obviously, this is a still image, but motion certainly here would contribute as well. We've got a nice shallow depth of field here, as we can see with the background. The colors are soft oranges coming from that sun going up or going down, really help to elevate this shot as well. And it's free of distraction. It's very, very clear, very, very straightforward what we're looking at. Now, let's say we take the same shot and we make it bad. So here we've got the same still here, and now we can see, well, there's a lot of things wrong with it. Now, I have exaggerated it just for effect, but really, if any one of the elements that I previously mentioned were wrong, it'll generally disrupt the entire shot. So here we've got a badly composed still. So it's out of focus, as we can see quite clearly. The edges are soft on our main subject. It's very unclear as to what we're meant to be looking at here. That's because the composition here is poor. The cropping is very, very bad. It's the young lady is being cut off here right through her head. So the viewer's attention wanders. It wanders to the background there as well, where everything is completely overexposed. The overexposure is creating distractions in the scene. I mentioned there it's poorly cropped. There's little or no balance to the scene. So we really just don't know what we're meant to be looking at here, and it's uninteresting. It's not even that it's uninteresting to look at. It's quite ugly to look at. So composition, any of those elements, you get them wrong, and it can really throw the entire shot out of balance. However, finding the shot is going to take practice, and it's all about exploring and exploring your subject. First of all, when it comes to composition, to good composition, you need to have some idea in your mind's eye of what it is that you want to capture, what type of subject you want to capture, so that when it comes to the composition, your message is very, very clear. Spend time with it, or if you're shooting people or animals or whatever it is that you happen to be shooting, spend time with your subject. Okay, understand your subject. Understanding your subject is going to lead to stronger compositions. Use your environment. Use your background environment. Place your subject within the scene. What's happening in the background. What type of subject is it that you're filming? If you're filming, say, perhaps an artist, you might want to film them in their studio. So think about the environment that you are filming your subject in. Use props as well. So don't be afraid to introduce elements into a scene to make it visually stronger. So again, using our artist, you might give the artist a paintbrush or something simple like that, just to communicate your message more clearly. Communicate with your subjects as well. If it's somebody you are working with, actors, or you're working with models or anything like that, communicate. Let them know what you're doing. Let them know why your shot may or may not be working. Okay, so once they understand what you are doing, you can collaborate together to improve your compositions. And be patient. Sometimes you have to wait for the right light. Sometimes, it can take a little bit of time to get things prepared correctly. Sometimes, it can take a little bit of time to get the right focus, to get the exact right look to the scene. Just be patient and it will come to you. Plan out your vision. So you should always go in, very similar to our first point, you should always have some idea as to what you want to capture. Planning is key to successful video, which we will have a look at a lot more as we continue on throughout this course as well. At the same time, you also have to be on your toes and anticipate action. So perhaps you're doing a documentary style video, you need to anticipate things that may happen before they happen, so that you know to capture them. Okay, and again, that will just come with practice. Final thing then, just before we have a look at the different compositional techniques as well, is just to obviously remember to choose your aspect ratio. So we spoke about aspect ratio in lesson number 2. There's these are the key ones, the main ones really when it comes to video. 4:3, 16:9 is our standard one. If you're playing things safe, you want to be going with your 16:9 for widescreen, widescreen televisions. 3:2 will generally give you the full frame if you happen to be shooting with a full frame DSLR. But it's also completely going to come down to where you decide to show your video footage. Now, no matter what aspect ratio you choose to go with, all of these compositional techniques that we have a look at in this lesson and all the movements that we have a look at in this lesson will apply to whatever aspect ratio you happen to choose. Now, when it comes to compositional techniques, there's so many that we could go on and on and on with this lesson. So later on in the course, in Module 2 or Module 3, there will be an advanced composition and movements lesson where we're going to look at the ones to get you up and running, the most effective ones in my opinion, and I suppose the most straightforward ones that you're going to be using quite frequently as well, beginning with symmetry. Okay, so symmetry is, well, it's pretty straightforward. It's all about having something that looks the same on the right and the left hand side, or indeed the same on the top and the bottom, or indeed the same on the right and the left and the top and the bottom. Symmetry is all about having a perfect line down the middle that gives us a reflection on both sides of the image that are very, very similar to each other. So for that reason, symmetry is brilliant for capturing architecture. As you can see here, if we just divide this down, more or less down through the middle, you can see that it's pretty much a mirror image on both sides. So if you're capturing anything architecturally, do see if you can capture the symmetry of it. And certainly if you're a fan of, say, Stanley Kubrick, or indeed if you're a fan of Wes Anderson, you'll notice that they use a lot of symmetry in their cinematography, particularly in The Shining and in 2001 The Space Odyssey and so on, when they are composing their shots. Symmetry is also great for, well, any type of architecture really. So again, things like bridges or anything like that. If you're lucky enough to own a drone, that you can achieve a shot like this, again, look out for the symmetry, and also not just artificially as well. Do look out for naturally occurring symmetry, and symmetry doesn't have to be just from left to right, as I mentioned. It can be from top to bottom as well. So anything reflective, like a reflective pool or a lake or anything like that, will create symmetry as well. So quite a straightforward one to begin with. It's also a fun one to begin with as well, just seeing what is out in your world that is symmetrical that you can capture. Now, perhaps the most well-known compositional technique when it comes to photography and when it comes to video is the rule of thirds. This is actually a great example of the rule of thirds. Some of you may be familiar with this already if you have practiced photography before, or even if you've done just a little bit of research in composition yourself, because it's such a well-known technique. The idea of the rule of thirds is that we have this imaginary grid that appears over our image. And as you can see, we've got two equally spaced horizontal lines. We've got two equally spaced vertical lines. And using this grid, we try to place interesting elements within our images along these lines, or indeed along the axes where they meet, along the vertical and the horizontal where they intersect. So for example, with this image here, as we can see, everything is kind of composed over to the right. We've got this bird here on this tree stump, and it's all composed over towards the right. Now the bird's not falling exactly where the horizontal and the vertical meet, but it is within that area, so it still gives us that strong balance, that natural kind of look of balance within the image here. And as you can see there over on the left hand side, then there's a lot of space. There's a lot of kind of empty space. We wouldn't say this is empty, we'd call it negative space. Negative space is not a bad thing either. Negative space just gives a nice bit of room to the image, so that it just feels a little bit more balanced. Let's have a look at a landscape example here. So we've got a little bit more going on within this image here. As you can see, a very nice sunset. We've got a nice kind of horizon there as well. And of course, we've got the people in the boat, the fishermen there in the boat. If we bring up our imaginary rule of thirds grid, as you can see here again, compositionally, a lot of the elements are falling quite close to where those horizontal lines meet and where those vertical lines meet. So we've got the sun and it's falling along the vertical axis there. And indeed, the horizon is also falling quite close along that horizontal bottom line as well. So again, using the rule of thirds, when you're composing it now, you can compose this, you can have the display set so that you can actually see this grid, but you should always try to be just imagining it when you are composing your video or you're composing your still shots. Now, of course, it can be used in any kind of aspect ratio. So here we've got a wider aspect ratio. And indeed, here we've also got a portrait as well. So it's not limited to things like landscape shots or wildlife or anything like that here. So again, the composition here looks correct to our eyes. It's following the rule of thirds. When we place our imaginary grid over the image here, we can see that the right eye, or the model's left eye, is falling very, very close to that intersection there in the top right. Okay, and again, by placing the elements here, you can see that her lips are falling across that bottom horizontal line there as well, and we keep a nice kind of balance to the overall image. Now again, we can see it's cropped a little bit at the top, but that's okay. So we can see the crop is a good crop here. It's not cropping through anything important. We're still keeping the hairline just about, but you wouldn't want to crop it so that you lose that hairline. So again, you still just need to be very aware of exactly where you're cropping the image. But by using the rule of thirds here, with the aspect ratio here, there's kind of wider aspect ratio, it gives us a very cinematic type of image. Now, next up, another very popular compositional technique known as leading lines. So again, this should be fairly self-explanatory, as you can see here from this particular still. Again, a very cinematic still that we have here, but we've got these lines here of the road, and indeed of the side of the road here, and of course those dogs that are kind of leading us through this image all the way to give our focus to what's happening in the horizon. It kind of gives an idea, a sense that they're obviously, well, they're probably well into a long journey. Leading lines bring us through the image and will bring our attention to a particular focal point. Let's have a look at another example. So here we've got another fairly extraordinary piece of architecture, a little bit more contemporary from the image we saw earlier. For to introduce our leading lines here, we can see we've got these kind of, I suppose they're artificial in the sense, again, that this is a man-made structure, but everything is designed to lead our attention to that doorway that is on the I say the horizon, but that is in the distance. And of course then we've got those two students who are walking up to it there as well. We've got lots of straight lines and diagonal lines here to lead our attention in that direction. It's actually nicely offset here as well, with the windows and with the pillars too, that are given a little bit of vertical lines here to break up this scene. But again, very, very well composed, and everything is bringing our attention eventually to those doors. But our eyes journey through the scene to that point, so we don't miss out on anything else within the scene. Let's have a look at another example. Again, another quite traditional example. Leading lines, usually roads, bridges, again, any kind of architectural kind of thing will generally lead our eyes to a particular point. And again, it gives this kind of sense of journey. It gives a sense of a starting point and a destination. So here again, we've got the nice lines here of the bridge, we've got the lines of the road, we've got the lines of the fence along the side of the bridge. It's nicely offset with that horizon, with the beach, and of course a focal point then of the American flag in the distance as well. Now, next up we have framing, which is particularly important when it comes to film. Now, if you're composing, say, a scene like this, a kind of nice landscape / architectural type of scene, you can just enhance it a little bit more by introducing a new element. So, for example, this shot here, the Eiffel Tower, one of the most well-known visual tropes in the world, no matter where you're from, the Eiffel Tower. However, just adding a nice bit of a different element here to it by introducing a nice framing of the trees that are in this location here as well. Just makes it a little bit different from the type of shot that we're used to seeing when it comes to the Eiffel Tower. So framing can be natural frames like this. Of course, it can also be man-made frames like this here as well. Like within this image here, we've got this kind of window frame, old rustic window frame, some kind of graffiti carved into it there, so a little bit of history there with it too. Framing this really nice landscape as well. If you'd imagine, if you set up the shot, you could almost journey through the frame here, into the landscape beyond. But that frame also tells its own story. So you've kind of almost got two images in one happening within this type of scene. So framing can just add another level to your composition. Where it becomes really important is when you are filming people, when you're trying to do portraiture within filming. Now, depending on the type of film that you're trying to capture, you may be shooting vertically, say if you're doing something for Instagram stories and so on, but in general you are never going to be filming vertically, and this makes doing a portrait of a person a little bit more challenging. So what you want to try is find frames within the scene that you can place your subject into that kind of creates a natural frame around them. So for example, doorways would be a very, very common one. Windows would be another very, very common one here. But as you can see, we've got this kind of neon lights happening here around our subject, around our model, which creates this frame that brings our attention to our subject and creates this portraiture type of image. Now, lastly, for our compositional techniques before we move on to movement, is to talk about angles. Now, angles may seem quite straightforward because it's simply a case of looking in different directions. However, what you need to remember when it comes to angles is that, well, first of all, the angle that you use is that is what your viewer is seeing. So the viewer is always going to be the person seen in the angle that you choose. Now, that angle has a different meaning. Every angle that you use will actually help to tell your story, and it's really, really important to be aware that some angles that you use will have either a positive or a negative impact on the viewer. Now, so for example, say an angle like this where we're looking up at the trees. Now, think about this when you're out walking the streets or you're out walking in nature. How often do you look up? We actually don't do it that often. Maybe we look up when we hear a noise. Maybe we look up when we are in a situation like this, but we certainly don't keep our heads up for very, very long. When you look up like this, it kind of reminds you, I suppose, of, in one way, the place of where you are, but also how small you are as well. Because when you look up at something like this, or say you were to look up some towering buildings, it reminds you of perspective. It reminds you that you're just one person, I suppose, in this very big, wide world. Now, also, obviously, aesthetically, it's quite pleasing as well, just with the composition of this. But do think about the actual message that it sends too. Opposite then, would be to be looking down at something. So say we're looking down at a person. So here, we've got a person lying down. Lying down, that's quite relaxed. That can be somebody falling asleep. It could also be a sign of laziness. If someone's kind of taking it easy, it's someone who's chilled out. So there's a lot of different kind of messages that we can take, from somebody lying down. But as the viewer, remember, we're above this person lying down, or we're looking down at something, and you can take that literally, that you're looking down at something. And again, it makes us feel bigger or more powerful than what we're looking down at. Now, again, if you were to put, say, a person in a position where we're looking up at them, it gives that person, I suppose, the sense of power, and it makes us feel a little bit smaller than them. But it doesn't always have to be negative. So this type of perspective can also be used to make the person appear confident, can make them appear determined as well. So it doesn't always have to be a kind of positive or negative experience. It's all about, as well, as opposed to kind of lighting, the colors and everything else that you use as well, which obviously we will look at a later stage. But using these different angles will generally have multiple meanings applied to them, and you need to understand what all those different meanings are. Now, again, for example, if we were to be filming children or pets, and you don't want to have that kind of power dynamic in your images, whether it's up or down or anything like that, well, get down to their level. Make yourself level with them. And it'll also help you to see from their perspective. There's just no way you could get this type of shot if you're towering above them or anything like that. By getting down to their level, it brings you straight into their world, and you can see like the sense of wonder here. And when this type of shot will bring it back to your own childhood as well. Hopefully it does. Anyway, I think it's just is a wonderful, wonderful shot. Now, the complete opposite to our first image, where we're looking up, we can also look straight down. Now, obviously this type of shot can only be really achieved if you happen to be using a drone, but this will give us a sense of place. It'll give us a sense of exactly where we are straight away, but it also might give us a sense that this is the world is busy. There's so much going on. There's so many stories happening, in this space. Like obviously this is New York, with the yellow cabs and that. But as we can see, there's lots of people in this place. There's loads of people in the cars. There's loads and loads going on. So this is what we would know as a establishing shot, which we'll look at in just a moment, a little bit later on in the lesson, because it provides us with a huge amount of information straight away, in the sense that we know the place, we know there's loads of things going on in this place, we know the time of day, etc., and so on, but we don't know exactly what the story that's going to be told is yet, but we will eventually. So those are our different compositional techniques. What you want to do with all of these techniques then is to take the next step and to combine them with different movements. Now, very important when it comes to filming is that, one of the main things that you will need to do with filming is try to keep things steady. So naturally, when you move, things are going to shake. If you haven't got something to try and help you keep things steady, things are going to shake. And this can be used, for great effect. For example, if you think of, say, like the Blair Witch Project, shot on video footage, and, when they're running away from the Blair Witch and all of that, it's a sense of panic and so on. It's really intense, but you could only really kind of take that type of footage in short bursts. So with movement, there are a few tools that you may need to look at investing in, depending on the type of video you want to capture. Now, with all that said, there are some basic equipment that you're going to need if you want to master movement in your film making. Starting off with tripods and video heads. So I'm going to be using a couple of different examples, but the Manfrotto brand here that you can see, they tend to be the top of the range. Unfortunately, also the most expensive brand out there as well. And when it comes to video, you're going to be wanting to buy your heads and your legs based separately. So let's have a look at the video heads first of all. Having a look at this one here, we can see, well, first of all, we have a handle that we can use that allows us to pan and will allow us to tilt. So that's moving up and down and to left and right. Now, it's also a ball head as well, which means it gives us some limited movement here, basically kind of 90 degree movement here when it comes to whether we want vertical or horizontal shots. It has a pan lock as well, so if you're going left to right and you want to keep things nice and steady, you can set that pan lock. You want to combine that then with a set of good video legs. Now, as you can see here, again, going with the Manfrotto brand, we have the ability here to be able to take the center column out of just the vertical, the traditional vertical viewpoint, and go horizontal with it instead. However, again, combined with, in terms of cost, you could be talking well up to about 300 to 400 euro or $400 altogether, which unfortunately is the price when it comes to higher quality video making. Now, getting to the next level, you'll also want to look at a set of rails. So rails will give us two options when it comes to movement. The first option is trucking, which is tracking your subject, so basically following along with your subject as you're filming them, or panning along with them, of course, as well. Or we also have dollying. Dollying is zooming in on your subject without zooming in using the lens. So there's a big difference. We'll have a look at those in a moment. But dollying is when we physically get closer using our cameras. Now, if you happen to be shooting on a smartphone, gimbal is the way to go. Gimbal will give you nice steady movement, a whole lot of freedom actually, really, when it comes to filming, when you're using your smartphone in particular, to keep things nice and steady for you. Very, very straightforward to use as well. As you can see here, you can change the angle if needs be. But you are going to probably be looking at about $150 to about $200/euro for something like this. But if you're primarily someone who photographs and films using their smartphone, definitely well worth the investment. If you happen to be using a DSLR or a mirrorless camera or anything that's a bigger rig, you're going to be looking at using a Steadicam rig, which unfortunately you're going to be also looking at investing a lot more money into these kind of rigs. They don't come cheap, but they will give you a huge amount of movement. They'll also give you a huge amount of options when it comes to attaching accessories. So this type of rig here in particular will allow you to attach microphones and that as well. So if you want to capture better sound, it'll also give you focus pulling too, so that you can actually change your focus without having to put your hands on the camera at all. As you can see here, just where the thumb is, where the camera operator's thumbs are, he's able to change the focus here just by rotating that wheel. But these types of setups will cost you pretty much as the camera itself. Now, so with those different equipments in mind, let's have a look at some of the different shot types, some of the different movements, I should say, that we can do, beginning with our zoom. Now, zoom is a little bit different from dollying. Zoom is when we actually use the lens itself to zoom in on our subject. Now, this can be a little bit troublesome because it means that, as you can see here with this shot, that you can lose focus. It can be very, very difficult to zoom in on our subject. I'll just go back there and just play it again. But it can be very difficult to focus and to zoom in on our subject at the same time. Sometimes it is, of course, going to be the only option that is available to us, but dollying is more effective. Next up is our pan. And our pan is basically our left to right, our right to left. Very, very good for this type of shot. So if you're into doing video for interiors or anything like that, say you're doing a promotional video for a hotel, this type of shot works for very, very well. Again, I'll just quickly go back there just to show you that again from the start. So just simple left to right here. We get a good sense of the space, nice little kind of balcony area moving into the interior here. Looks very, very luxurious, but a very, very simple technique just to kind of give us an overall idea of the space that we are filming, that the viewer is looking at. Then, of course, we have our tilt, which is like a pan, except it's up to down or down to up, like in this shot here. A little bit of time lapse here as well, as you can see with the clouds, but simply starting from the bottom and slowly working up to reveal the subject. Okay, so very, very simple. Now we have our dollying, which, as I mentioned, a little bit different from zooming, because dollying is maintaining the same focal length, it's maintaining the same frame, it's the same focal length, but actually just physically moving in on the subject. So here you can see it's just slowly moving in on the subject, and it kind of creates more intensity as you're slowly filming or slowly moving in towards that subject. As you can see here, quite subtle in this one, but very, very effective. Next, we have tracking or trucking. So trucking or tracking is basically following alongside your subject. Well, I suppose similar to panning in the sense that you're moving from right to left or left to right, but you're maintaining the same speed and movement as your subject. So, for example, here you can see the video maker, the cinematographer, whoever is moving alongside the dancer here. They're moving along with them as they are moving. They're following them along. That is a trucking shot. So again, you kind of want to use rails, or you need to have something kind of steady here, a steady cam type of thing here. As you can see then, it's kind of panning out there as well, kind of dollying backwards then to kind of reveal more space. So I'm sure there's plenty more to that clip. Similar to trucking, except going on a vertical axis now, is our pedestal. So pedestal, you're not tilting the way that we saw in the building. The pedestal, you're maintaining, you're keeping the the same, I suppose, perspective. You're not kind of tilting it at an angle, but you're just simply moving up and down. So again, like our tracking shot, I'll just go back here again just to show you that because it's a short clip. But like our trucking shot, I should say, the pedestal, it just moves on the vertical rather than the horizontal here again to reveal, you know, in this case, a particular car. Then we have our rack focusing. So rack focus is when we change focus in a shot. Okay, so rack focusing, we're maintaining a same focal length here, but we're changing the focus to reveal perhaps something, you know, in the background, or to reveal something here in the foreground. As you can see here, a very, very shallow depth of field is also being used in this type of movement, which we will have a look at in lesson number 6. Very, very effective close up there as well. Now, so with all those compositional techniques and those movements, we now put everything together to create different types of shots. Now, shot types basically, again, these are kind of well established within video parameters and video rules and guidelines and so on. Each type of shot basically will help you to tell your story, helps you create your narrative. So perhaps the first one that you should be starting with is the establishing shot. So an establishing shot, now it doesn't necessarily have to be a drone type of shot like we are seeing here, but an establishing shot gives the viewer a huge amount of information straight away. For example, we can see the place, New York, we can see the time of day, it's evening. Most likely it's evening. Perhaps it could be early, very early morning. It's difficult to tell, but we know it's a low light situation. We can get a sense of the actual time frame, you know, if it's modern day as well, judging by the look of the cars, you know, some of the newer buildings and so on too. So it kind of establishes the time frame as well. It also gives us an idea that, okay, so we're going to be looking at a story that's happening within an urban environment. So we get a lot of information from that. The next shot then, typically to be followed up with that, is going to be what's known as a full shot. So a full shot, as you can see now, we're down to ground level. Of course, we're going to be using New York now for all of these shots here, because, you know, it's a lot. It's very easy to get lots of footage of New York. But as you can see here, it's kind of you know, a fairly wide angle shot here. Gives us a good sense of again the environment that we're telling our story in. But it gives us a slightly closer look at what's going on as well. You know, look at the neighborhood and so on. Now, obviously, the time of day has changed here as well, so these clips are not exactly linear. Then we have our medium shot, which gets a little bit closer up, again, kind of just showing us a little bit more of the busyness, the activity and everything that's going on here. But again, it's much more about, I suppose, the focal length here in this particular shot, where we're not as wide as the previous shot. With the full shot, the medium shot gets a little bit closer in on your subject. So really, you try to start using a medium shot to basically narrow down exactly what your subject is. Going closer then, of course, we have our close-up. So again, there's no kind of story happening here. It's just kind of clips I put together of New York. But here we've got a close-up shot, you know, firmly establishing exactly where we are, at least what country we are in the world here. But again, it's just it's giving us kind of a smaller look at the architecture, a closer look at some of the details that are around the city. And then we have an extreme close-up, which is getting in even closer in onto the smaller details that help to create our narrative. So you can kind of see, you know, as we're putting these clips together, it's actually just kind of a story about New York itself. And of course, it'd be hard not to do a shot of New York that looks like this. This is known as our up shot. So very, very similar to what we saw with, you know, our perspective, our tilting up. We've got our upshot here as well. Again, kind of puts the viewer firmly in, gives them a perspective, a sense of their surroundings here, you know, kind of the business side of things here and so on, with these, I suppose, financial types of buildings. Then we have our down shot, which, you know, the viewer is looking down at the finer details here in this particular shot. But of course, you know, if we had somebody perhaps lying, or we did the down shot of somebody lying on the ground, it kind of puts the viewer in an elevated position here. But here it's just again to kind of get a little bit of the nightlife and a little bit of the constant activity in the city, no matter what the weather. And then finally we have a POV shot. So this is done just behind the head in this particular case, but a POV shot is basically a point of view shot from the videographer or the cinematographer, whoever happens to be capturing the footage. POV shots, they're used very, very often, say in horror films and things like that. You can imagine, you know, from the kind of killer's eyes, you know, coming up onto the person or whoever it is. It's usually done from a POV type of shot, but it can absolutely be used for this type of walking around shot as well. So the idea of all of this is to put everything then together. So you've now got your compositional techniques, you've got your movements, and you've got some shot types. We'll certainly be digging into shot types a lot more when we talk about putting narratives together. But you can start experimenting and mixing everything up. A really good way to practice this is to simply watch your favorite movie and try to count the different types of shots that are used. Try to count the different type of compositional techniques that are used. Make lists of the ones that you're not familiar with. We will certainly be covering them all throughout the course as we progress, but that's a really good exercise for you, is to try and identify all of these different types of shots, these different types of movements, and these different type of techniques in your favorite films. Let's have a quick look at where we are with our skills progression. So we added a lot of skills here, particularly when it comes to our creative skills, because it's so much about just looking and moving to get the shot. So we're not focusing too much on technical ability, but having the ability to be able to use the different rails and the different tripods and stuff. That is adding to your technical ability. And now you also have more communication. You're able to speak to somebody and say, let's put an establishing shot in. I want to use a medium shot here. Might use an extreme close-up and so on. So obviously you can mix up all of these shots to tell your story too. So with that, let's have a quick look at what is coming up in lesson 5. Hard to believe we are halfway through the first module already. We're going to be talking all about color. Okay, so we'll talk about the use of color in film, the use of color when you're creating your videos. We'll talk about black and white as well in this lesson, how to use black and white. Sometimes removing color means that we've got much more focus on things like light and form. We'll have a look at that in the next lesson as well. And we'll briefly look at what's known as color grading, which I'm sure if you've ever researched video yourself, you've probably heard this term color grading before, along with white balance as well. So lots to cover in that lesson. Your challenge for this lesson, a simple challenge. I'd like you to shoot a panning and tilting scene using the rule of thirds. Hashtag Shaw Video on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. So using the rule of thirds, I'd like you to do a panning and a tilting scene together. So you're combining two movements and you're using one compositional technique. It doesn't have to be anything particularly groundbreaking that you're filming, but just combine those three together and you'll see very, very quickly how when you start to bring, just a number of these elements together, that the overall aesthetic, the overall look and the overall quality of your video will increase dramatically. So thank you so much for joining me for this lesson. I'll see you all back again very, very soon for lesson number 5. Until then, take care of yourselves and so long.